I wish my American viewers and subscribers a happy Thanksgiving Day. For the first time, I am actually making a Thanksgiving dinner. I mentioned it to someone who noted that she knew lots of other people who are also celebrating Thanksgiving in Europe. Or is it just Britain? I'm not sure. But anyway, it just shows how Americanized we are becoming. So certainly, we are celebrating Halloween, which is yet another pagan American ritual that we have got back. Yes, Yawn God, I don't waste time talking to Europeans whose leaders only take orders directly from Washington anyway. Why bother with them? The most important people are really Americans who, with their wonderful democracy, can maybe one day get the kind of government they want in their pursuit of happiness and liberty. I'm also addressing non-Americans because there will be lots of non-Americans who feel that they are victims of American foreign policy, and they may well ask, what have they to be thankful for? But that is to misunderstand the nature of suffering. As I was saying to Jess Purviance earlier, the story of Job, the book of Job, is really about making the point that Job was never a bad guy. He wasn't being punished because he was sinful. In fact, the whole story began with God and Satan, his employee, his agent provocateur, his prosecuting counsel. God was having a word with Satan, saying to Satan, look at Job, giving prayers of gratitude to me. That is, if only more people were like him, if only more people remembered to write their thank you letters to God, so to speak. And Satan said, well, you've given him everything he wants. He has wealth, he has health, he has children, he has riches. Why wouldn't he be thanking you for what he has given, what you have given him? I bet he won't be quite so thankful when he suffers from the loss of what he currently enjoys. And God said, "One a bet, and the rest is history." So what was the point of the suffering of Job? It must surely have been to make the point that if you're not being punished for your sin or sins, then you must be undergoing a test to qualify you for something better than you have now. And all you have to do is believe in God correctly and obey his laws, and you will get immortality, in the sense that Job enjoys a kind of immortality in having a book of the Tanakh dedicated to him. Yawn God is talking about a movie, Eyes Wide Shut, by Stanley Kubrick. I actually watched it, but it made no impression on me at all. I'll have to read the Wikipedia summary to remember what all this stuff with Tom Cruise was all about. It had something to do with orgies, group sex. So I will consider that another time. Clearly, it's made a lot of impression on impressionable people. Perhaps Jon God will explain why it has to do with the story of Job. The point is that Job gives an alternative, another explanation to the problem of suffering, because as people who believe in God and his uncanny ability to reward good and punish evil in this life and the next, we are to deduce that if we are suffering, it must be for our sin, and which of us is perfect. And if we really haven't done anything wrong in the case of Job, then our suffering is a test to fit us for something even better than what we have enjoyed so far, that we have no conception of. And obviously Job, when he was going through his trials, couldn't imagine what he was being punished for, but he still held fast to the correct belief in God, trusting in God, not just believing in God, because it's not enough to believe that God exists, because his wife, his very annoying wife, who urged Job to curse God and die, suggests that she believed in God, but she did not believe in his benevolence. But Job was the one who correctly believed in God and believed in his benevolence, on his omnibenevolence. And so he did not succumb to his wife and curse God, which would have been blasphemy. And so, because he held fast to his emunah and bitachon, his belief in the existence of God and his trust in God, he has a book all to himself, dedicated to him in the Old Testament. So that was his reward. And now we come back to the subject of why the rest of us who are not Americans should be thankful for the American Republic, which currently does so much evil and spreads corruption throughout the world with their policies of globo homo, and they do so because Americans do not, in fact, have an established religion, and it doesn't look at the moment, from their current state of division and mental disorders, that they're likely to be doing this anytime soon. Many of us would be forgiven for thinking World War III is more likely to break out than Americans actually correcting their ways of thinking and their ways of doing. But we live in hope, and we have to, if we believe in that sort of thing, trust in God. So Jon God is trying to tell us what he thinks is the meaning behind Eyes Wide Shut. So there was a maths teacher in Eyes Wide Shut. Epstein was a math teacher. Job owns the place. That is Job's sin. Job owns a place where the sin happens. He must be punished. So Jon God is insisting that Job did something bad. If you don't believe in benevolence and you die of it, what is that called? I don't get the joke. Yes, he is right in saying that American evil only functions because foreigners buy it, meaning that America only gets away with it because everyone lets America get away with it because they're too scared of their imperial overlords. And I'm saying, I agree. But then it is rather like the emperor's new clothes. So none of the adults would actually say that they didn't think the emperor was wearing any clothes at all. They went along with the official narrative that the emperor has new clothes and they're invisible. And I think the story goes that only if you are illegitimate do you not see that the emperor has splendid robes. And because nobody wanted to be cancelled for admitting that their parents were sex offenders, because they could see that they couldn't see the emperor's new clothes and only saw his nakedness. They were restrained. They were constrained from saying what they believed to be the truth, which was that they couldn't see any clothes on the emperor, who was naked. And so this problem of not daring to breach taboos is in fact ancient. So it means that most people are cattle, really. They go along to get along. They feel that there is safety in numbers, in going along with whatever is supposed to be the political orthodoxy. In fact, the Chinese in the communist revolution had a term called whateverism, which is that because the rules kept changing so much in Mao's China, I think it was during the Cultural Revolution, most people just couldn't keep up with the laws because it kept changing. And so they said, well, whatever it is that Mao is saying at the moment, we agree with it because we don't know that what he said yesterday, he has walked back on today. So if he has changed his mind, so too will we have changed our mind, because we will be obeying whatever Mao says for fear of him interfering with our life, property, and liberty. So that was whateverism in communist China, I believe, during the 1950s. And obviously this tendency not to look for trouble, certainly not with the government, it is universal and eternal. And so it only it and so we have to distinguish between the beta male and the alpha male. Sadly, because of decades of co-education, most men are beta males who think it a mark of success to have lots of sex with immoral women who are not their wives. And if you take away this reward from them, they will be utterly destitute and horribly lowered in status, so they will never go against the eternal verities of feminism. And that is basically what the problem is. I have an image of a puppeteer controlling a puppet who is controlling another puppet who is controlling another puppet. We don't see the hand of the actual puppeteer, but the most proximate puppet to him is feminism, followed by Jews, followed by blacks. So that is really how to understand it. The political orthodoxy of the time is feminism, and uneducated men, intellectually dishonest men, would rather blame Jews and Muslims and non-whites and foreigners than blame their utter submission to the eternal verities of feminism, which is cheap sex, cheap women, and a culture of casual sex. which it doesn't appear they're going to give up anytime soon, which is, of course, dysgenic. And to be dysgenic is to be unmarriageable, and you are unmarriageable if you don't want to marry, and you don't want to marry because you want to screw around and pump and dump women. And, well, particularly the women who are quite happy to be welfare mums, unmarried mothers with variously fathered illegitimate offspring. So, what do you expect? If these people are complaining about their corrupt and incompetent ruling classes, shouldn't they look to themselves to see if their morals are even better? No, but they're not. They're actually worse. And, coupled with the fact that they're less educated and even more stupid and even more corrupt and uglier, fatter, there's no denying the truth of the saying that people deserve the government they get. So if you are a society of sex offenders, bastards, sluts and slut fuckers, what kind of government do you expect to get but a bunch of lying, incompetent, corrupt villains and villainesses? The idea that Jews are the overlords is obviously sacred to anti-Semites who prefer to blame their bad government on Jews. They've probably thought it for centuries, so they probably have parents who've always blamed the Jews, and they're not going to be changing their minds anytime soon. And if they were to change their mind, they would basically have to admit that they've been wrong all their lives, and they would rather die and go to hell than do that. So that's their problem. A lot of ideas and beliefs have, in fact, become unofficial belief systems, and to acknowledge the falsity of these beliefs is, I guess, a big thing, and particularly for white people who have been lied to since the 4th century, since the Edict of Thessalonica in the year 380 was passed, where it was the edict which required that all Romans in the Roman Empire had to be the Trinitarian kind of Christian. And this explains the supremacy of the idea of the Trinity, because the most powerful churches in the world remain Trinitarian. But of course, it's a lie. We know it's a lie because the educated kind of Christian theologian would know not to engage with Jews or Muslims on the Trinity, because they would already know that it is morally and intellectually indefensible. It's only the lower tier Islamophobes who keep thinking that they have won the argument because they're so stupid that they don't know that they lost the argument a long time ago. And this explains the practice of heretic burning, because even the priesthood could not win the argument against a determined denier of the Trinity. They knew that the only way to suppress anti-Trinitarian rebellion was to ruthlessly burn heretics at the stake. And Americans ought to know about the story of the Salem witch trials, when Americans were executed for sorcery and was blasphemy one of the crimes of the Salem witches? Let me check on this. So America before the First Amendment was a terrible place, as terrible as life was in Europe if you wanted to ask a few questions about the belief system you were supposed to accept. I should just ask the question. What were the crimes the witches in Salem were accused of? What crimes were the alleged witches in Salem accused of? So this is my message to Christian nationalists, which is to, well, forget it, right? Forget it, because everybody knows that if you had your way, you're going to pass a Christian amendment, and your Christian amendment will implicitly or explicitly abolish the First Amendment. And you're not going to win, because there are already so many divisions within Christianity in America that before you can even get it together to even say an established Church of America, your enemies will have surrounded you and raided you and destroyed you. So don't even think of it. I'm maybe not so good about these at speed reading. I've actually asked a question and it's not quite answering me, and referred to me to the I guess it was just witchcraft, but okay, I'm not going to belabor the point. Mike says, the whites who blame the Jews and immigrants are the conservatives who hate feminism, the liberals in the cities that are hardcore feminists and generally better educated. Okay, so Americans have their regional differences. We already know that they went to war with each other during the American Civil War because of their regional differences, and now we have, the coastal elite types and the flyover country types, right? So middle America is basically red, and liberal America is blue. About the people who hate feminism, I wonder how many men actually dare say this. I mean, yes, they come online to spout their hatred against feminism, but usually under anonymous accounts. So that's not going to take them. That's not going to get them taken seriously. They have to say it using their real names, and by and large, they do not say these things. Mike says, all those stories are why secularism is so important. No American, other than some Muslims maybe, and that is a big maybe, want your religious-based law. Well, what about my religious-based law do you object to? I actually sent you my book, Secular Quranism, available on Amazon. So, having read it, if you remember having read it, do you know of any proposals that I made in that book that you find particularly objectionable? Why don't you? Okay, if you said it, I don't remember. And if you haven't said it, it's time to declare your reasons now or forever hold your peace. So just by saying secular law, most of these atheist Americans will go, yay! And if I say God's laws, then the same Americans will say, no, we can't have that. But really, you have to, all you have to do is refer Americans to their history. All this, reference, there is an implicit reference to God in the US Declaration of Independence, talking about man was created equal implying that there was a creator, and on their dollar bills, "In God we trust," and all their swearing and their allegiance to the American Constitution, blah blah blah. "So help me God." Do you still do it, or have you changed? And if you keep changing your rules, it means that you're being rather capricious, rather feminine, and maybe that's your problem. You're just being too uncommitted, too double-minded, and not wanting to be pinned down. Okay, my law is obviously based on the Quran, because imagine if I said, "Oh, it's just Claire's law, Cause law." You'll say, "Who the hell is she? Is she even American? No, I'm not going to listen to her. Who does she think she is, trying to tell us Americans what to do?" So obviously, I'm not going to say it's just my opinion of what Americans should do. It would be, well, I have to refer to a higher authority. In fact, the supreme authority of the universe, if he exists. And aren't Americans supposed to believe in God? Well, they need to kind of decide whether they do or not, or whether it's good for them to believe in God or not. Or how about we make these people believe in God, and then we might get better behavior from them. So this is my idea. My A and B schools. I'm so proud of my A and B schools. But let's not talk about that at the moment, because I have talked about it at some length with Carol. And it's basically A schools for the children of married parents, the legitimate offspring of married parents, and B schools are for bastards. And then we will have B plus schools, which will be the children of repentant unmarried parents. And they might be so repentant that they marry each other, and then their children go to A school. It's that sort of idea. So I am saying, Mike and other Americans, that actually the founding fathers were proto-Muslim. Obviously, they're not going to say the Shahada and freak all the early Americans out. They instead used clever words like deism and theism and mix them all out. And so they can just sort of pretend to accuse each other of being a deist or a theist, and it doesn't much matter, because at least they weren't accusing each other of being Mohammedans or atheists, which would have been reputationally destructive to any American then in political life. So the deist, the false deist debate is basically a kind of fortress to protect American men in public life from being accused of being either atheist or Muslim. So that was really what it was, because even now, if you wanted to look it up and say, does theist just mean Trinitarian, and does deist mean monotheist? You'll get a range of different answers, and there's no need to relitigate all that once you understand the purpose of this fake theist-deist debate. Now, if we can agree, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, that there is only one Abrahamic God, then I think we can just move forward, right? So if you do trust in God, as your dollar bills say you do, then you will have to obey his laws. And this leaves you to decide which set of laws in which set of scripture you want to follow. Now we have to take into account the feelings of Americans who are atheist or agnostic. So they don't believe in God, and obviously, we're not going to stone them for being idolaters and blasphemers, because that would go against, the First Amendment, supported by chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, that says, there is no compulsion in belief. Truth stands clear from error. So what this verse is saying is that the First Amendment, or this verse, gives you the space to express incorrect opinions without being cancelled. But what the people with correct opinions, who, based on truth and logic, can say is, oh, look at these silly people. They think a Jew created the universe, and they think God and the Holy Spirit and the Son are one indivisible Trinity. And, well, where did they get that big idea from? They can just go on and on until the Christians run out of the room crying, having grown tired of being mocked and ridiculed. And another big idea that came to me was, years ago when I was at law school, I was told of this thing called a deeming provision. So a deeming provision is basically saying you are something when in fact you're not, right? An example would be, if you reach the age of 16, you are deemed to be mature enough to either be married or have extramarital sex without anyone getting into trouble with statutory rape and that sort of thing. So there are certain conditions you have to satisfy in order to do certain things, and then you are deemed to have reached adulthood when you're 18, even though you're immature and silly, or mentally disabled, or you could be deemed mentally disabled, and you can be whatever age you are, and you will be deemed not to have full legal capacity. Now, under my proposals as a secular Quranist, for a secular Quranist America, what you could do to kind of herd people, because people, cattle, it's kind of the same thing really, judging from how many people who are just completely unprincipled and only are only motivated by their appetites. So you can only, deal with them with, carrot and stick, incentives, bribes, or threats of punishment. So, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. Yes, okay. So let's say America becomes secular Quranist. Then everyone could be deemed to be a secular Quranist. And if they say, no, it's a horrible idea, I don't want to be put on the register as a secular Quranist, I want to be known as an anarchist, or a communist, or a liberal, or a fascist, or whatever, and then you opt out. But then, or a Christian, that was the most important category, and they'll have to make an effort to opt out of this. And probably, inertia, moral apathy, waiting around to see who's going to do it first, not them. They will kind of be deemed to be secular Quranist. It's so easy, really. It's so easy. So people, just listen to me. It's really very easy. And how would we bring about such a state? It's by, of course, discussing secular Quranism amongst any American who doesn't feel that their government is doing things that way. So I know that there are a lot of disappointed Americans about, Israel. But, I mean, to be fair to Trump, he was always very pro-Israel, to the extent that he was called Zion Don, right? So he's not, as far as I know, showing any signals of leaving Israel behind. Although some years ago I did read an article in Foreign Policy magazine, which is the in-house magazine of the neocons, about maybe saying goodbye to Israel because we can't afford it anymore, something like that. You'll still be able to find it online if you're interested. So, for Americans, I'm afraid, that they all have the wool pulled over their eyes, because the only way that Americans are stopped from discussing Israel is by being accused of being Nazis and anti-Semites. And this is not working anymore because brave Tucker Carlson has. I'd love an interview with Tucker Carlson. I think that would be my most powerful rocket to fame in the USA. So anyway, Tucker gave Nick Fuentes a softball interview, and basically it went quite well, and people who previously would not deign to give Nick Fuentes the time of day, or pretend that they just don't know anyone who might be discussing Nick Fuentes in their hearing, are now saying, can we discuss Nick Fuentes? Can we discuss Nick Fuentes? And some YouTubers allow this sort of thing, and some refuse. But anyway, this blanket censoring of Americans from discussing Israel is, of course, deliberate. So instead of saying, why should we pay for Israel, Americans will be accusing each other of being Nazis and anti-Semites, and never really be discussing the cost of Israel. And even Jews are, they don't seem to realize that they have, I think mostly without their knowledge, been made a mascot of the American empire, because the founding myth of the global American empire is that we're there in Israel to protect the Jews, and we're the world's policemen. This used to be the role of the British, and we have to take on the white man's burden and protect the Jews, and this is our founding myth, our credentials to being the good guys, and this myth is wearing thin. And even for Jews, they sort of realize that being a Zionist Jew attracts only hatred, and more Jews are saying, I can't bring myself to say that I'm anti-Zionist. I'll just say I'm non-Zionist. So people can argue about what it means to be non-Zionist. But I say to Muslims, if they look at chapter 17, 104 of the Quran, they will find that Allah is Zionist, because he's saying, the verse, I'm not going to quote it for you exactly because I want you to go and look it up. And you will see that the beginning of the verse says, is God saying to Moses, go and dwell in the promised land. And then the other half of the verse is God saying, in the end times, Jews who are not already in the promised land are to go there in a mixed multitude. So it was always going to be a one-state solution, that Gentiles and Jews are supposed to live in one country called Israel, presumably under Sharia, because that would be the only way of attracting the favor of God. And this would mean, well, Israel living under Sharia, or Israel adopting secular Quranism with Israeli characteristics. Now, I know a lot of Jews, Israeli Jews, would object, but let's say they thought, well, that would be better than being attacked, and they might say, let's do it, and the US State Department might have problems about that and want to suppress any Israeli leader promoting the idea of secular Quranism with Israeli characteristics, because they would anticipate that the moment the US colony of Israel adopts secular Quranism, America will not be far behind. And that is, in a nutshell, my itinerary for global domination, the global domination of secular Quranism. And so, and this is what we have to all be thankful for, even if we do not quite approve of US foreign policy. Let me go through Mike's comments in detail. The creator is in the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution. I don't think that even the word creator was mentioned. I think it just said man was created equal. I'm pretty sure of that. Oh, I have to look it up again. Yeah, so basically America is special, not just to white people and whatever, but it's actually Islamic, and yeah, I hope more Muslims are capable of understanding the implication of what I'm saying. Well, just keep pointing out that that the First Amendment is very, very Islamic. Okay, so I see that the creator was mentioned, because the preamble says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's basically the principle of Shura. It's all there. It's all there, Muslims. It's just too ignorant to use them. That whatever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing it invariably the same object evinces a desire to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So really, Jefferson was saying, even this you can change. Right. So I think the arguments are all there and should be used in a more creative way. I don't see why. I mean, is anybody else making my arguments? I don't think so. Okay, I know Mike was going to say, oh, this In God We Trust thing was to fight communists. But anyway, it's there. It's not there. And do you want to fight communism or not, Mike? I don't think you're a communist. Yes, yes, yes. I'm aware of the Barbary Wars and, the piracy suffered by American shipping. Yes, John Adams was a Unitarian, and so was Jefferson, making them closer to Islam, making them proto-Muslim. Mike continues, I do not trust in the non-existent law. How can you deny the existence of the First Amendment? If Chapter 2, verse 256 is about freedom of speech, why did Ali kill the atheist? Okay. I am not claiming that Muslims have perfectly interpreted their Quran. Of course I'm not, and no Muslim would either. So I'm saying, it's a continuing process. We have God's laws. We have people who want to interpret them, or people who want to distort them for reasons of political expediency. And these two groups have to be able to argue it out in a fair fight. And it cannot be a fair fight if this debate is taking place in an absolute monarchy. And as you know from the Sunni narrative, only the four rightly guided caliphs, only four caliphs were rightly guided because they were not absolute monarchs. But after that, all caliphs that followed were absolute monarchs, and that is why they made such basic mistakes about the interpretation of the Quran. Right, I think I've spoken long enough. I hope my point was reasonably clear. Thank you, Mike, for responding to what I'm saying. I hope I did address the points you raised in the chat. Thank you very much for coming. And I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, including the people who don't like America, because I think when America finally corrects itself, if only to retain their moral and political leadership of the world, if only to show they are like the Ninevites who were capable of repenting before the sky fell in on them. I like to think that Americans are also capable of having some instinct of self-preservation and some desire to live in a society where the pursuit of life, liberty, happiness, and justice will serve them better than living in a society that does not. And obviously, to have justice, we must have just laws. And in order to have just laws, we have to agree on the scripture which contains God's laws most acceptable to your society. And I would say that any atheist or agnostic, if forced to accept God's laws, would, but knowing there is more than one version, would choose the more liberal version. And that can only be the Quran, because the New Testament contains no laws of God. Only the Torah and the Quran do. The Torah is too hard for Jews. It's got 36 capital offenses, while the Quran hardly mentions the death penalty, but does, in principle, support capital and corporal punishment. And now I end my lecture. Thank you all for coming, Americans and non-Americans.